Your stories heard. This is Undeterred. Live! Podcast streaming on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Stories heard. This is Undeterred. Undeterred by Ken.
Hello mga kaibigan with feelings! So nandito naman tayo sa another week, another episode ng Undeterred by Ken, and we're back! So this week is very special. Hindi, kasi this week ang ating topic ay this is something that's very close to my heart. Wow! Parang paulit-ulit ko natin sinasabi lagi yun. So, this week, ang ating itatakal na topic ay about gender and development. Okay, so yung ating topic for this week is focusing solely on engendering the NSTP, or the National Service Training Program. So what do we mean by that? So these are the ways on how are we going to integrate gender and development in NSTP. And so that's the very first question that we're going to try to answer at least, or shed some light upon in this topic, is how are we going to exactly do that? How are we going to integrate GAD in NSTP? So thank you sa ating facilitator sa ating napag-aralan na talk, si Miss Cristel Gomez Magdaraog. She is a coordinator under the office of the UP Diliman Gender Office. So very informative yung kanyang natalakay about topic about engendering NSTP, ano. So, engendering NSTP starts with leveling up. This is leveling up our basic knowledge about gender through three key concepts of gender, which is WID, WID, WAD, WAD, and GAD, GAD. So we will discuss ways how to integrate these three key concepts of gender in NSTP. So let's start first with contextualization. In terms of contextualization, of course we need to know nasaan na ba tayo, 'di ba? In terms of gender sa ating bansa, 'di ba? So with that, we need to ask ourselves, what are the different approaches of gender and development in community engagement? Kasi this is very important. So yun nga, sabi niya there are three, 'di ba? Sabi yung tinatawag nating WID. So let's start with WID. Ang WID, this is an acronym for Women in Development. So sabi dun sa isang pananaliksik, sa isang pag-aaral ni Boserup in women's role in economic development, sabi dun, ang ating economy ay focus sa involvement ng men at hindi nakikita yung women sa workplace and livelihood. So in Women in Development, we're going to flip that. We're going to do a more responsive and focused idea of involvement of women in the workplace and in the livelihood. So hindi na lang sila invisible sa ating community. So we will see them in a different type of lens, 'di ba? Ika nga, sabi, kailangan natin makita yung women as contributors to the society, not just the people or the body left in our homes to do household tasks, household chores, 'di ba? So we need to see them and look to them as contributors in the society, and we do that by giving them and getting them involved in the workplace and in the livelihood. And siguro ang specific na kailangan natin gawin dito is to give them chances and opportunities to represent themselves in the workplace and in the livelihood opportunity. Give them livelihood opportunities. So this is very, very important in terms of gender and development, as well as in community engagement. So with Women in Development. So sabi naman dito ni Miss Cristel, sabi niya, after a decade of practicing with Women in Development, magkakaroon tayo ng another concept. This is a level up concept of WID, which is WAD. So after 10 years, di ba, it's a decade, we will experience, if done correctly yung WID, kakaroon tayo ng WAD, which is Women and Development. What do we mean by that? So we will ask ourselves, why do we see the work of women as invisible in the society, a society, 'di ba? Bakit natin nakikita or tinuturing na invisible yung kanilang ambag or work sa ating society? Bakit? How are we going to implement yung mga changes na gusto nating gawin sa structure of our society in terms of yung sinasabi natin kaninang livelihood, 'di ba? As well as yung experiences of women in the society. So through WAD, Women and Development, we will slowly look into why we are treating them as invisible, why are we not giving them the same credit as men in terms of performance in the workplace, in terms of performance in our community, in terms of their ambag, quote unquote, ambag in the society, in terms of the livelihood that they're actually pursuing and giving out, 'di ba? So napakadami. So yun yung two concepts, 'di ba, na mag-work hand in hand. And then there's another concept, the third concept, which is GAD, or Gender and Development. So in this concept, we will consider culture and society naman, 'di ba? And of course yung power relations. Bakit we see men as the yung mas nakakataas sa society, and then women, and then LGBT. So why is that? Bakit nagkaroon ng ganung power relations? Ano yung kino-consider nating mga cultural and societal factors na naka-affect sa ating pagtingin in terms of power relations? And of course, this really is our courage to confront yung challenges, 'di ba? And to change, 'di ba? Yung mga contributors na yung mga sinabi ko, mga factors na yun kung bakit ganun yung pagtingin natin sa gender sa ating society. Sa tingin ko, this is also focusing on yung tinatawag nating holistic transformation of the societal organization or yung ating social organization. Kasi talagang if-flip niya kung di ba yung sabi nila, it's not equality na ibibigay natin, this is equity na ibibigay natin in terms of gender and development. Pag tinanggalan natin yung hindi pantay na pagtingin natin sa mga tao na kung saan nakakataas yung lalaki, pangalawa lamang ang babae, ang mga kababaihan, at panghuli yung mga miyembro ng LGBT. So in this transformation, in this holistic transformation, hindi natin ibinababa yung mga kalalakihan doon sa kung saan papantay sila sa mga kababaihan, at ang mga kababaihan ipapantay natin sa mga LGBT. Hindi. Kung hindi tataas natin yung level ng approach at pagtingin natin sa mga LGBT, at dahan-dahan itinataas din natin yung pagtingin natin sa mga kababaihan, kung saan makikita na natin pantay yung pagtingin ng society as a whole sa lahat ng genders, not just men. So through this social organization and transformation rather, we will achieve yung tinatawag nating gender equality and transformation. So those are the three key concepts, or to properly contextualize where we are right now as a society in terms of women and development, which is WAD, and then gender and development, which is GAD. So next is let's put this context into the level of community engagement. So there are 5 levels of community engagement in terms of gender and development. So number 1, of course, we need to inform ourselves what are the things that we need to learn about gender and development. And then number 2, we need to consult who? Consult those people who actually have, number 1, basic knowledge about gender and development. Number 2, those people who have worked in the fields, in the reality, diba, in the grassroots, on what gender and development looks like in reality. And then number 3, level 3 is yung involvement. Yun nga, we need to engage ourselves. We need to immerse ourselves to the reality and involve ourselves to the current situation, di ba? And then number 4, level 4 natin is to collaborate. Collaborate with who? Collaborate with the community, members of the community. Say for example, women, LGBTQ, men, where they coming from, And then level 5 is to empower. Sabi naman ni Miss Cristel, this is the last level. However, this last level it's going to really take some time to process. How are we going to empower? Kasi it's not going to be it's not an innate thing for us as a society to parang matanggap na lang agad-agad yung mga social transformation na sinasabi natin, di ba? So yung pagtanggap pa lang mahirap na, paano pa natin sila i-empower kung hindi natin sila hindi natin tuluyan lubusang naiintindihan, 'di ba, yung concept ng social transformation na sinasabi natin. So in terms of empowerment, it really will take some time for us to do that, but of course hindi naman tayo nagmamadali. Small things really contributes to bigger things. So, paisa-isa lang yan, pero pag tinignan natin, when we step back and look back 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we don't have anti-SOGI bills in different or anti-SOGI laws sa ating mga cities, 'di ba? Ordinances, kahit ordinances pa yan, walang mga ganun. Pero ngayon, nagkakaroon na. So, these are the things or the ways on how we are empowering communities through our community engagement capabilities. So, ayun nga. Sabi nga ni Ms. Cristel, again, this is a long-term process and we need to consider the role, syempre, of different genders in the society. Male, bakit nagko-contribute yung male into the current disposition of women? How the society looks at the LGBT, 'di ba? So yung sinabi pa niyang isa, may potential, 'di ba? Na tignan natin, may potential yung mga babae at ang mga bakla sa improvement ng society. So babalik tayo dun sa role nila and how we see their roles as an important factor that contributes to the society. Hindi lang lalaki ang may capacity to take on leadership roles, 'di ba? The way we view the last election, we know that we view Lenny as a parang mas mababang klaseng presidential candidate in terms of her gender kasi babae siya. Hindi natin siya binigyan ng enough credit na tignan sana natin yung kanyang capacity, capabilities, education, 'di ba? Those things are genderless and intellect bears no gender. So instead of looking at the thing that will contribute less to her winning, why not look to the things that she's capable of and why she is really deserving to win, diba? So those type of things, those type of mindset, it really takes time for us to grasp the idea on how are we going to empower women to take leadership and for us to give them, diba? Parang enable them to take on leadership roles. So those things. Now let's talk about how are we going to integrate gender and development in NSTP. So, sabi ni Ms. Cristel, there are different ways on how are we going to do that. So, first, number one, we need to know what lens to use, diba? To look into and reflect to different situations in terms of gender. So, in terms of gender lens, we need to be reflective, diba? And we need to know our biases. Sa tingin ko, this is very powerful to know our biases. If you are a masculine, male, dominant man, of course you will see yourself as the top, as the person on the top of the food chain, diba? And you're going to be biased about what makes you you, what makes you strong, what makes you feel how you're feeling. So we need to look at the realities on the ground. Sabi nga, do you need more education kung bakit parang hindi mo nakikita yung women as an equal partner in terms of developing society? Why are you treating LGBTQ as less human than you are? So how are we going to shift our focal point from one lens to the other, from one point to the other? So we do that by engaging with organizations that, number one, promotes GAD or gender and development. And yun nga, nakikita natin yun ngayon unti-unti na. This is done through gender sensitivity trainings or GSTs and webinars in terms of gender, SOGI, SC. So those are the things on how we're going to integrate. Number two, sinabi niya rin yung gender sensitive yung kailangan natin maging gender sensitive, from gender sensitive to gender responsive. So ngayon nakikita natin, 'di ba, lalo-lalo na dito sa UP. UP is a microcosm of the society. Nakikita natin talaga na napapractice ang nagkakaroon talaga ng iba't ibang representation in terms na lang of Zoom meetings, 'di ba? Before hindi tayo masyadong sensitive about one's pronouns, what pronouns to use, 'di ba? Sinasabi lang natin, okay, based on your appearance, I will call you a she, I will call you him, 'di ba? So ngayon nakikita na natin na we're more responsive, automatic tinatanong na natin sa email. Meron na tayong drop down sa email, what are the pronouns that you want to use, blah blah blah, 'di ba? MX, him, they, her, them, so those things. So from being sensitive, we're now responsive. We're doing efforts to really address yung mga gaps in terms of gender and development. So another one is we need to frame this integration through following yung principles of human rights. Sabi sa principles of human rights na natakil natin last week, it is number 1, non-discriminatory, equality, and consent. Through these three, yung non-discrimination, equality, and consent, makikita natin at ma-understand natin, maintindihan natin yung dynamics of power, diba? Yung communities na ina-approach ba natin, are they powerless or are they powerful? So, titignan din natin, aside from dynamics of power, titignan natin yung mga bagay na that goes beyond yung stereotypes, di ba? Nakikita kasi natin, okay, bakla yan, mahina, ganyan-ganyan. Pero hindi natin nakikita yung kakayahan nila behind those stereotypes, di ba? Yun, sa pamamagitan ng mga yun, ma-avoid natin yung tinatawag nating ayun nga, isa pa pala sa sinabi ni Miss Cristela, no, yung pag-avoid natin sa paggamit ng yung sa paggamit natin, 'di ba, ng gender fair or gender inclusive language in terms of addressing the community, kasi hindi naman lahat spokesman, spokeswomen, 'di ba? Usually mas magandang gamitin na lang siguro natin spokesperson, 'di ba? More gender fair, more gender neutral, 'di ba? So through our language, 'di ba, mas nagiging sensitive tayo sa roles ng communities, and we see ultimately pag tagal-tagal ng panahon, we will see roles as merely roles, not gendered roles, 'di ba? So nakakatuwang isipin na unti-unti sa UP nakikita ko ito at talaga napapractice natin as a social norm. So after the integration, of course, we will craft our projects one way or another, and we do this through different things. Pero ang pinaka tumatak sa akin is yung gender analysis. How are we going to do that when crafting our project? So number 1, the first and primary step and the most important one for in my opinion is yung gender analysis. This is we identifying or surfacing, di ba, yung possible gender issues na kinakaharap ng community na yon, since we are focusing on gender this time, gender and development. So ano yung mga possible gender issues and how are we going to address those gender situations in the community? Is there a gap, di ba, in terms of gender in that community? So in terms of identifying and surfacing those possible gender, how are we going to analyze them? So, sabi nga ni Ma'am Cristel, from analyzing, after natin, siyempre meron dong iba-ibang ways, 'di ba? So, meron tayong collection ng data, yung mga sex disaggregated data or yung mga tinatawag natin gender indicators. Meron pa yung surface, yung pagsa-surface nga ng mga, after natin mag-collect ng data, of course, i-analyze natin yung data, i-validate natin yung data, and then we will surface possible gender issues. Of course, after nun, magde-design tayo ng mga program to properly address the gaps in this community in terms of gender. After nating mag-design, so of course, titigil lang tayo sa pagde-design? Hindi. Syempre, i-implement natin yun sa ating community. And then lastly, i-monitor natin, sorry, not lastly, but second to the last, we will monitor how these implemented changes in the community takes place in the community, in the setup of their community. And then how are we going to assess our project? Of course, we will check through interviews possibly, and then we will go back to collecting data. So that is the cycle of gender analysis. So magkakaroon ng collection, surfacing, design, implementation, monitoring, and assessment. So in terms of the three key um, um, wings and branches of NSTP, so CWTS, LTS, and ROTC, how are we going to craft our project through GAD? So, sabi dito, sa CWTS, of course, we will focus on collecting yung sex desegregated data and gender indicators. Pag nakita natin, in-analyze natin, and validate natin yung data na nakuha natin, we will come up with a possible surfacing ng issue. So, ang issue dito, for example, kailangan ba nating ulitin yung gender sensitivity training dito sa community na to, since they're still not that kind of respectful in terms of the LGBT people na community, sa mga community members nila, in terms of catcalling sa mga kababaihan. So, kailangan ba nilang mag-repeat ng GST, o kailangan natin palalimin lalo kung ano ibig sabihin ng gender sensitivity sa community nila? So, that's how. Number 2, sa LTS naman, sabi ni ma'am, let's review yung pedagogies, di ba? For biases, ibig sabihin yung mga method ng pagtuturo, di ba, sa literary training service. Meron, kailangan ba natin ng content changes, di ba? Kulang ba yung examples of women and LGBT in the curriculum? So, we need to do and review the pedagogies and check them for biases. Baka naman masyadong male dominant and male bias yung mga ginagamit nating materials, di ba, in terms of teaching, and yun, so those things. And then lastly is ROTC, di ba? Since ROTC is about power, about relations, titignan natin, are there hierarchy in the process? Meron bang mas nakakataas, di ba? So organization ang tawag, hindi hierarchy, kasi pag hierarchy, talaga namang nagkakaroon ng power relations. Mas mataas yung role, mas mataas yung pinangahawakan niyang power. So, nagkakaroon ng tendency to corrupt those powers, and then that causes violence, bullying, and aside from that, diba, since this is a male dominant and heavily dominated by male na NSTP, ang ROTC, nagkakaroon ba ng toxic masculinity inside the ROTC? And yun nga, titignan din natin yung policy. Do they accept, hindi ba enough yung acceptance rate na nakukuha ng women in terms of ROTC? Puro lalaki lang ba yung nabibigyan ng chance to continue with ROTC? So those things, policy, diba, pedagogies, and data. So those are the things, and important yon. Sa isa pa pala, sorry, sa aking napansin talaga, no, sa tingin ko this is really helpful in identifying yung proper support para ma-support natin yung project natin in terms of gender and development. Yung sabi ni Miss Cristel na yung SUCs and HEI, so yung mga state universities and colleges and higher education institution, required sila na gamitin yung kanilang budget, 'di ba? At least 5% of the budget is really pointed to for GAD, or gender and development. So whatever it is, so yung budget pala ng ating university, at least 5% of that budget is required na it really is talaga nakkeep para sa GAD. So nakakatuwa naman isipin na hindi lang siya talaga parang sinabi lang na kailangan natin ng gender and development sa ating university or whatever, pero binigyan talaga siya ng pondo para talaga masuportahan kahit papano, hindi lang sa pagkakawang gawa ng mga members or students, di ba, sa kanilang NSTP. Kung hindi, talaga merong organization na pwedeng mabuo, 'di ba, na funded yung organization. So nakakatuwa 'yon. So yeah, that concludes our episode for this week, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to my podcast. Again, my name is Ken, and thanks for listening to Undeterred by Ken. Bye-bye!
Your stories heard. This is Undeterred. Live! Podcast streaming on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Stories heard. This is Undeterred. Undeterred by Ken.